In this video we are going to define what we mean by the marketing audit, talk briefly about why we need marketing audits, and then look at the three components of the marketing audit, which are the external macro environment, the external micro environment, and the internal environment. First of all, what is a marketing audit? It's really a snapshot of where the business and its marketing are at a given moment in time. So you could perhaps also define it as a marketing health check on the company. So, not primarily a historical analysis of events or a forecast, although these are considerations. It's really all about what's going on here and now, what's happening outside and inside the company, what's working for us, and of course what isn't working for us. And there are various models and ideas that we can use to help us conduct an audit, which I will explore later. A lot of the audit process is about structured research, but not all of it, because there are some things that we just can't research very well. For example, we don't usually know exactly what our competitors are going to do and when, or exactly when we might encounter something like a cost of living crisis or disruptions in the supply chain. It's also really important that we keep what I would call a realistic perspective on our marketing. So, whilst marketing theory tells us that it is really important for an organisation to, for example, conduct customer research, test out new product ideas, stay close to customers to find out what they really want. In fact, the realities of running a business mean that often we just don't have the time or the money to do this as thoroughly as we should do. So I won't say take a guess, but we might have to make informed judgments as part of the audit process, based on our marketing expertise and possibly limited hard data. If someone decides, for example, to open a cafe, then they should at least have the thought in their minds that somebody else at any point in time might decide to do the same thing on the same street or on a nearby street, and should be considering the impact that that might have, even though they don't know when or where that might happen or what the new cafe might be offering. Here's a nice model to show us what a marketing audit should look like. It should be comprehensive. Nothing should be overlooked. It should be structured. That is, conducted in an organised way. Unbiased. Don't try to cover up weaknesses, because your audit needs to identify the good and the bad. And it should be periodic. Don't just do it once and think, yeah, that's it, we've done it. It needs to be done on a regular basis. So, to conclude this opening section, let's remind ourselves of the college's definition of a marketing audit that is included in the study guide. A marketing audit is an appraisal of the internal and external environment of an organisation, including an assessment of organisational competencies and capabilities, competitor analysis, and analysis of opportunities and threats. In very simple terms, marketing does not work in isolation. What an organisation's marketing looks like and how effective it is shaped by many things, which are inside and outside the organisation. And if we don't understand what these influences are, and we don't understand the impact they're having, then our marketing campaigns are unlikely to be as effective as they could be. If you think back to an earlier video where we discussed some of the models which help to define marketing planning, they all started with a "where are we now" stage. And this is effectively the marketing audit. Once we know where we are, we can start developing a plan for the future. In this context, macro means all the big global stuff that's going on outside an organisation. The most widely used tool or model to describe the external macro environment is PESTER, and some of the many variations on this which are covered in the study guide, like PESTLE, STEEPLE or PEST. And to remind ourselves, PESTA stands for political, economic, social and cultural, technological, ecological and regulations. Political covers areas like government policy, stability of different governments, the tax system, foreign policies and your government's relationship with other governments. A government's stance on free enterprise versus state control, attitude to free trade, trade agreements or lack of favourable agreements with other countries. Economic considerations. Growth rates. Is the country experiencing or heading towards recession? Inflation and interest rates at home and in the countries you trade with. Levels of unemployment. The cost of labour and the cost of living. The idea of offshoring, that is, moving operations overseas to take advantage of lower labour and production costs, is now gradually being replaced by onshoring, as costs and living standards in developing countries start to rise, start to catch up, and manufacturers are now sending operations back to their home countries like the UK. Social and cultural. For example, demographics. Is the population ageing? What is society's view on issues like working mums, work-life balance, immigration and emigration, saving, home ownership? In the UK, we very often take the level of home ownership as a barometer of prosperity. And around 65% of households are currently homeowners, and there are several government initiatives now aimed at getting more young people out of renting and into home ownership. In Romania, home ownership is around 90%. And in Switzerland, which would probably appear on most people's list of prosperous countries, home ownership averages around 36%, falling to only 12% in some urban areas. So, be wary of making direct comparisons between different countries. You could and should extend this definition to cover social responsibility. What social impact is our business having on all our stakeholders? Is it positive? Is it negative? And how can this be improved? Technological. And there are two aspects to consider here. First of all, how tech might influence the products you market and the markets you supply. But then also, I think a factor that's often overlooked, and that is how technology might impact your job as a marketer. A couple of years ago, it seemed like everybody was talking about marketing automation, and plenty still are. But now these are being drowned out by people talking about AI. And maybe these will soon be drowned out by conversations about things like the metaverse, which Mark Zuckerberg describes as the internet that you're inside of rather than just looking at. And if some of this sounds a bit too far removed from the day-to-day marketing activities in most businesses, well, there are still plenty of other more down-to-earth marketing tech ideas to focus on, like hybrid events, for example, allowing people to attend a conference or exhibition in person, but also to enjoy the full-on remote experience. Or collaboration software, helping remote teams to work together. Ecological. What ecological factors might impact on a business in the future? And remember here that we are conducting an audit. So, even though it might be tempting, this isn't the place to make a case for why your company should be more ecologically aware in the future. What we're doing here, if you remember back to the beginning, is in the audit we're taking a snapshot of how things are at the moment. For example, how do ecological considerations influence our customers' attitudes and behaviour? Are ecological factors likely to affect our supply chains? Are our processes for disposing of waste and recycling going to be acceptable in the future? And so on. And finally, regulations. There are many legal regulations a marketer needs to be aware of, including product regulations and consumer protection, packaging, recycling, competition law, laws affecting intellectual property, data protection, international trade, and plenty more besides. There are also voluntary codes marketers need to work within. For example, the Committee of Advertising Practice Code in the UK, which is the one that tells us that we always need to be legal, decent, honest and truthful. Companies might also publish their own internal guidelines. For example, Britvic publish a responsible marketing code for their marketing teams, which you can find online. These regulations and voluntary codes are being tweaked, updated, replaced and consulted on all the time. For example, this year the Competition and Markets Authority have been advising government on whether current competition and consumer law is helping or hindering the UK's goal of achieving a net zero economy by 2050. One simple suggestion is the introduction of standardised definitions for terms like compostable and biodegradable, which sounds like a really straightforward, almost inconsequential bit of tweaking of the regulations. But I'm sure if this happens, there will be companies who today are selling products which are biodegradable, which suddenly they won't be able to call biodegradable because they won't fit within the new definitions, which is bound to have a massive impact on their business. I always look at models like PESTA as nice, simple ways of organising our thinking to help prevent us from overlooking stuff. But keep in mind, we don't necessarily need to apply them in the same way in every context. I saw an article recently where natural forces was added to the list of macro factors. It is usually covered under the ecological E in PESTA. But clearly in this case the author thought that natural forces needed to be bigged up a bit, to be given a lot more emphasis. And if you think about it, this is a macro factor which is massively important for sectors like travel or agriculture. For example, a ski resort without snow needs to radically rethink how it can be more effective and make more money in the green season. And, of course, a barrier reef with bleached coral or a Victoria Falls carrying very little water are more intractable problems for the travel sector and, in reality, for the rest of us. So there is some scope to use and adapt the models we use to suit the situation that you are dealing with. The external microenvironment looks in a bit more detail at the world outside your own organisation. In very general terms, you could say that the macroenvironment defines those things that once you start taking action based on your audit findings, then you can't really influence. You can't have a big impact on the political situation other than by casting your vote. And you can't really influence future legislation. You just have to live with it. But you might be able to some extent to influence your micro external environment should you need to. You can audit your micro external environment by looking at customers, competitors, suppliers, sellers and/or distributors, and other stakeholders. Customers, first of all. We talked a lot about understanding customers and about segmentation in previous videos, and all of that is really important here to get a real feel for who your customers are, how you can keep them, and how you can attract new ones. Do you know who your competitors are? What about competition from more discrete substitute products? That is, the sort of competition mobile phones present to camera manufacturers, or recipe box companies like HelloFresh present to local restaurants. Suppliers are a key part of the micro audit. For example, are your supply chains stable? Is their quality consistent? Do you have a plan B in case of problems with existing suppliers? Who holds the balance of power in your supplier relationships? In other words, do you need your suppliers more than they need you? Who are the resellers of your products and services? Does your organisation sell through retailers, distributors, agents or affiliates? How often do you review these arrangements? Which channels are performing well and which are not, and why? And is it your fault or is it theirs? Finally, other stakeholders, which is a bit of a catch-all for anybody else whose actions might impact on your business. And these include pressure groups. For example, Keep Our NHS Public has supporters in a network of over 70 local health campaign groups. Trade unions. In December 2021, a takeaway courier company called Stewart, which is a bit of a bizarre name, cut its basic rate for drivers from £4.50 to £3.30 per delivery in Sheffield. And the Independent Workers' Union of Great Britain called a strike, and the result of this was, amongst other things, some users of Just Eat and Uber Eats weren't able to get their orders delivered on Valentine's Day 2022. You can dig a bit deeper into stakeholder analysis with Mendelow's matrix, which categorises stakeholders based on their power, or ability to influence an organisation, and their level of interest, which gives us 4 types of stakeholder. Low interest, low power, the lowest priority group. Low interest, high power, people to keep satisfied. High interest, low power, people to keep informed. And high interest, high power, people to manage closely. Which, to be honest, doesn't make a right lot of sense, unless you give it some context. So, let's imagine you're responsible for marketing a local league football club. A low interest, low power group would be people in the local community with no interest in football. A low interest, high power stakeholder might be the company that you lease your ground from, who are not particularly interested in what you do as long as you're winning enough matches so that you can carry on paying the rent. High interest, low power could apply to many of the non-playing football employees that you have. And the high interest, high power groups include supporters and sponsors without whom the club would not be able to carry on. And whilst we're looking at models, here's another, Porter's 5 forces, a way of viewing competition and other forces that impact on your business. And the 5 forces are competitive rivalry, supplier power, buyer power, threat of substitution, and threat of new entry. Competitive rivalry defines the extent and strength of your competition. Who are your existing competitors and what are their strengths relative to yours? Supplier power is a measure of how easy it is for your suppliers to influence your actions, for example, by putting up their prices or restricting supply. If there are plenty of alternative suppliers, for example, the individual power of each is likely to be low. Buyer power determines the balance of power between you and your customers. For example, do you have a few key customers on whose business you are dependent and without whom you would be in trouble? Or are your customers reliant on you for very specific bespoke products or services which it would be difficult for them to acquire somewhere else? The threat of substitution assesses how easily your customers' needs can be met in different ways. On a global level, for example, could Western Europe thrive without Russian gas and oil? On a more local level, to what extent might a Venetian blind company selling to offices be affected by a company selling photochromic window film? Finally, threat of new entrants. And I think 2 considerations here. First of all, how expensive is it for a new competitor to enter the market? And how attractive is it for them to do so? In other words, what future potential does the market offer? A few years ago, I always reckoned it cost about £2,000 to £2,500 to buy the kit you needed to set up as a graphic designer, which was about £1,000 for an entry-level Mac and £1,000 to £1,500 for the software that you needed. Then, lease companies started offering Apple Macs for £10 a week, and you could get all the software you needed through the Adobe Cloud for £20 or £40 a month, depending on the type of work you were doing. So, suddenly, you no longer need £2,000 or £2,500. If you had 70 or 80 quid and a bit of talent, you could set up in business as a fully kitted out graphic designer. Now we come on to those environmental factors which are, or which should be, entirely under the control of the organisation. The internal factors. Those things within the organisation which impact on an organisation's marketing activities. So, pretty much everything, which you can divide into resources, like buildings, plant and equipment, technologies, patents, inventory and money, and competencies, what it is the organisation is able to do. What people and experience and expertise does it have access to? What working practices has it perfected? What culture has it developed? Does it have a clear mission and set of values that everybody buys into? Does it have clear channels of communication running right through the business? As always, there are some useful models we can use to help audit an organisation's internal environment. McKinsey's 7S model. Our 7 S's are structure, systems, style, staff, skills, strategy, and shared values. The key question for an organisation is to what extent do these 7 S's help or hinder the operations and success of the business? For example, does the current management style have a positive or negative impact on the business? Do people have the skills necessary to move the business forward? Does everybody share the management's vision for the company? The 5 M's model, which has been defined as the 5 inputs an organisation needs in order to perform well. Manpower, money, materials, methods, and machinery. You could perhaps add a 6th M here for minutes or time. Is the organisation working efficiently? How well or not does an organisation utilise these 6 factors? Does it have the M's it needs, like working methods which are modern and machinery which is up to date? Hopefully you've been able to see from this video that the discussion about the marketing audit really takes the conversation way beyond the marketing department. So we cover things like money and manpower and environmental factors. And if you think back to the video about marketing orientation, then this really supports what we covered there, because modern marketing needs to take an organisation-wide view and go beyond product, price, place and promotion, and the things that might have fallen within a more traditional definition of marketing.